Welcome to F4 Talks. With me is one of the legends of Indian Air Force, Air Commodore Ashutosh. He did his schooling from Lucknow, a place where I did my university and where my father did his medical college. So he's here because he was air attaché in Ukraine. He speaks Russian. He's flown Russian helicopters. He's been to Ukraine regularly. So today you will get an Indian ringside view of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, Ashutosh, you've been to Ukraine over a number of years. Walk us through how you saw, and I mean, I don't mean as a historian, because of course you're a pilot, not a historian, but still you've had your brush with history.
Yeah.
How you saw the conflict, A, emerging, and B, developing.
Right. Just to debunk, I am no legend actually.
well, you were an instructor, and all your former students swear by you.
Believe me, many of us have been, and we all have our stories here and there actually. But trust me, I'm a very ordinary person who God was kind that I had a tryst with the Indian Air Force for a pretty long time, and God was kind to give me all the opportunities to fly the aeroplanes, to do whatever I was supposed to do. In that, there was a responsibility given to me to go to Ukraine as air attaché in the year of Lord 2011. And I came back much later in 2014 after a little bit of extension.
So you were there 3 years.
Yeah. So from that point of view,
that is when Crimea occurs.
I saw the first conflict, if you may call. So the genesis of the entire fault line as to how it developed, what exactly happened, how Crimea was taken away.
Or how Russians took Crimea.
But let's say how Ukrainian gave it up actually, for that matter. That's also another way to look at it actually. But like I said, how Yanukovych, green men, green men who sprung up and they took away and everything. So I saw it from all up front close. It was very clear to me as to how it's going to affect us. And since then on, I've been visiting, revisiting, and trying to keep myself updated. Not because I'm not a historian by profession, but the trigger which happened in me because of my boss over there, I must give credit to him for many understandings. Actually, our ambassador, Sri Rajiv Chandar, who was extremely kind to us and who taught us, who shaped us, mentored us, and under his tutelage, if I may say, we went on to do whatever work we could do with him. So I must duly acknowledge that. Okay, coming back to the point. When I landed up in Ukraine in 2011, believe me, Atul, it was perhaps one of the most beautiful countries in the world. To be very honest, I had traveled a fair amount of world before that when I had gone there. So I could draw a comparison and say that there was great amount of vibrance, and there was great amount of joy and happiness. There was a great amount of respect for Indian culture, and there was a great amount of likeliness between our two cultures. Later on the chat, we can point out a few for the matter. But the point here is that was the phase Yavra 2012, Euro 2012, which was co-hosted by Poland and Ukraine in 2012.
I remember, I saw that.
And I was there. The first match was Sweden-Ukraine, both playing blue-yellow jerseys. And Ukraine was magnanimous to ask Sweden to, choose their colors so that Ukraine can choose their colors, actually. Andrei Shevchenko, the legendary football player, I believe he's turned pro golfer now.
Has he?
Yeah.
Okay.
He scored the first goal, actually. I mean, it was a sight to be seen on the Maidan, which is the Independence Square, which turned later into dark and ugly pictures when the conflict broke through. That was the vibrancy. I thought that was the apex of Ukraine, what I saw at that time, as to how Ukraine was prospering, and it appeared to us very clearly that Ukraine is heading the European or EU way. Now, this was the belief which all my colleagues in the embassy, including my boss, had, that this is what's going to happen. However, I was not sort of convinced, because whatever little I dug up, and I lived on the streets over there. I spoke the language of the streets. I was working the streets, so to speak, actually, with a very different term altogether. But in that particular
you weren't just staying in your diplomatic bubble and kettle.
Yeah, the whole idea was to get the feel of the place.
Yeah.
And because of my link with Russian machinery, half of which I did not know was built in Ukraine.
Yes.
It was totally Ukrainian in its pedigree.
Yeah.
So when that happened to me, and I realized how my life was saved by many of these Ukrainian workmen working in the different Zavod, the plants, as what I used to visit over there. And that drew me to the entire thing as to how try and understand as to what exactly is happening on ground. So in that, my belief was, I think I'm quite pretty sure about it actually, that Ukraine, under the influence of who, we can talk about it, did not envisage this outcome which it eventually turned out to be.
Okay.
And they thought, and sorry to interrupt, and they thought that they can dissect themselves from the larger ecosystem of East Europe. Okay. I'm not talking it in terms of Russian Federation and so on and so forth. I'm talking the larger ecosystem of East Europe. They wanted to dissect themselves and get attached. Please, when I'm saying that, those of you interested should look up as to where the west of Ukraine, the cities of Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk, which part of the Europe they kept changing hands with. Who's Bogdan Khmelnytsky? Might as well look him up. The ruler and the horse rider who came winning and marauding. You need to see that actually as to what they were doing, carrying the bulat, the power of something like a gada, which they carry in their hand. So you need to see that, and as to how Ukraine went from one to the other side was to be seen. Notwithstanding that, post Second World War, post that era when everything was developing, post Germany when the wall fell, unification happened, perestroika and so forth, how things were moving forward, this particular aspiration of Ukraine to come to the West or to European side, and this game plan of the West to try and snatch Ukraine out of the close, tight embrace of East European ecosystem, I think that was the conflict which led to what happened.
Sure. So if we go back to 300 years ago, and Vladimir Putin's op-ed talks a lot about it, there is a sense that, look, Ukraine is the ancestral kingdom of Rus. Ukraine was attacked and taken over by the Polish-Lithuanian empires, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it is inevitable that Ukraine should remain in the sphere of influence of Russia. That is the Moscow view of the world. At the same time, if you take the Polish view of the world, they say, well, Western Ukraine in particular is a land contiguous to ours and therefore has a lot more in common with us, and therefore it should come more to the West and give us a greater buffer against Russia. And if you go back to the Soviet times, what people forget is that the brunt of collectivization, and there are books and books and books one can read, was borne by the Ukrainian peasantry. The kulaks were mainly Ukrainians, and in fact Joseph Stalin killed 3.5 million of them. And I have friends who are historians, and I have friends who are in MI6 and the British Foreign Office, and they often joke that had the British invaded Ukraine, they wouldn't have treated them with the racism Nazis did. They would have set up an independent Ukrainian state. They would have played divide and rule as they did around the world. They were rather good at it. And they wouldn't have killed 3 million Ukrainians like the Nazis. So the reason I'm giving this historical color, and of course those of you who want to dig up more can read a piece retired CIA officer Glenn Carl and I wrote just before the war begins. In 2022, we wrote it actually Christmas or Christmas Eve, December 2021. And the point is, it is a tortured land with a tortured past, with contending narratives of history and different geopolitical interests. And over to you, what did you see transpiring at that stage?
So, listeners, what Atul said is what I'm going to state totally off.
Okay, fine.
Academics and everything else, you've heard about him actually, for that matter, and you can go back and read.
Yeah.
So this is where the ringside aspect comes in. Where did I pick up this issue and this feel that Ukraine will not be able to be pulled out from the embrace of East Europe or whatever the Big Brother was actually. I picked it up from Romania. Let me narrate it.
Excellent.
So there was this seminar happening over there, a conference perhaps, which was discussing...
Which capital?
Romania, Bucharest.
Bucharest?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was Bucharest was also, Romania was also under my watch. I was accredited there. So I was required to be there because one senior official from India was traveling over there and he had to do a presentation on Prithvi missiles. There was a test done on anti-ballistic missile of the Prithvi model actually. So he had come to present paper on that and I was with him and I was part of that seminar, and as always my ears was out on the ground to try and figure out what's happening. Why? Because the interesting part was in the front row, or perhaps just behind the front row, there was a row of frushkas. Frushka is that cap which Russians, the P cap which Russians wear actually. There was a row of frushkas, a senior, perhaps a general on the right hand side and a lieutenant down the line actually. Age-wise stacked up over there, and the presentation was going on. Please remember, Romania houses the active component of the missile defense, right? And that was the time when Devsulu base was being reaccredited because the earlier launch base of which was available to Afghanistan was being denied, and they had no choice but to come back to this. And Devsulu was being just outside Devsulu was this SA-3 sites. The radars were in Turkey. The whole idea was to survive. So in that context, to a speaker, I asked a question. I said, "Sir, the talks are on. Ukraine is likely to follow EU very shortly. The handshake is going to take place very soon. And if we look at the European conundrum, we realize that wherever in the East, either EU has gone forward and NATO has caterpillared, or NATO has gone forward, EU has caterpillared. So it's just a foregone conclusion that today it is EU, tomorrow it will be NATO, and Ukraine will become NATO state. By which would I understand that these missiles here in Romania, or this site here in Romania, may shift to Donbass, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk? Exactly my words. You know what the response was? Before anybody else on the stage could respond, the general, with his Frushka, passed an elbow down the line. And the elbow travelled all the way. Up sprang a young lieutenant, and in chaste English, he just spoke to the audience. He said, "Whatever the gentleman is talking is in the realm of fiction. It can never happen." And he said,
that is totally understandable.
Understandable. So that's what my point is. That is the time that Ringside we are talking about near on the ground. I understood and realized the fact that it is the dynamics of neighbors.
Yeah.
Being on the ground in the streets and working over there, I knew that the economic tie of the East Ukraine with Russia were very close.
They have been for centuries.
There was travel, there was relationship, husband-wife, families, blah, 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 whatever you call it actually. So it was absolutely unthinkable that you will draw a curtain over there. And here was West, the likes of, who, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pell, and
our chief strategy officer, Peter Isaacson, despises her.
So that phone call is there on the net for you all to listen actually for.
No, I've heard it.
But the fact remains that here they were trying to, cull this out.
Yeah.
When this happened and I realized this, I dug more deep into it. Then comes out the next ringside expose or understanding of mine. Dnipropetrovsk is a town where you have Yuzhnoye, I'm getting mixed up the names here and there. Perhaps don't,
we won't hold you to it. That's
sometimes it happens. But I'm just saying that
what's more important is the point.
There was
rather than the detail.
So understand. So the Yuzhnoye is the space agency of Ukraine. Exceptionally brilliant products they had actually.
I see.
In my scouting for trying to see that actually. Imagine, you could have a Su-27 which carries a missile rocket under the belly, goes to the highest possible altitude in the particular direction and vector, launches that missile, and that missile puts a LEO satellite in the orbit. So it was the easiest possible way to give you a coverage over a battleground if you wanted to put a LEO which is persistent, finishes off sometime. A low Earth orbit satellite. Right. So they had some wonderful, the floating dock of Zenith rocket, which launches a satellite into the orbit. That means you didn't have to have a Sriharikota. You could drag that platform on the ocean with the help of tugs to the appropriate place to have the rocket launching your satellite in the most economical manner. So that's a wonderful, brilliant thing. But also, their credit was that they were the father of all SS series missiles of Russia. So from SS-18 to 21, everything was being found there. It was their patent. And if you look at the books at that time, which I did, I realized that these missiles are approaching their end of life. And they would need extension. So just imagine if this part of Ukraine was taken out of Russian influence, that factory would not have been available. They would not have been able to life extend the intercontinental ballistic missiles of Russia. And in one master stroke, the West could have neutralized large part of the arsenal on which Russia primes. Not spoken much about it, but like I said, the Ringside views this.
Yeah.
So it was.
It adds a great degree of detail, granular detail.
It's very clear and very straightforward actually. That I came back to my boss, I told him, sir, it's not. But we had a discussion and so on and so forth, and he said, no, it was done deal actually. You see what's happening.
Yeah, but the Indian Foreign Service is often called the Churi Zata service.
That's your fault.
I've had to deal with them for too many years.
Of course, you can go right ahead. But then what happened was the last 24 hours when the Maidan turned and everything else turned. Yanukovych had to take off in his helicopter. It was pulled down. It was the second time it was happening in that part. In fact, in Romania also, there has been a dictator who was trying to get away on a helicopter from a rooftop, who was pulled back. So
Nicolae Ceausescu.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, a friend of mine, his father fled Ceausescu. Nearly died.
So I stay to my point actually that Yanukovych fled inside, everything changed, and suddenly all that happened, and the independent district sprung, and so on and so forth. Actually, to link it up to Euro 2012, the way I saw the development happening over there, the airports are built up, the hotels are built up, the infra was done up, absolutely prime and very beautiful. All that was destroyed in the last 7 to 8 months in front of me. That's how the tide turned. So this is what
it was. What you're saying is that it was overreach on the part of the US.
Well, I would put it
geopolitical overreach.
I would put it differently. I would put it the way that one has to understand that neighborhood, geographical neighborhood, is a real fact of life.
Of course, I mean, look, the US did not allow missiles in Cuba. There was the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
I was about to say the same thing actually. In fact, the cross-reference was made to my reply there. That I said, look, you also had the same issue in Cuba. The same issue was there. Quite possible. There could be an issue happening in that particular conference when I was discussing with people. But be that it may, it tells us very clearly, and in our own context, and we also have a very turbulent neighborhood around us actually. Keep shifting from to the other, so on and so forth. So neighborhood is a fact. And the neighborhood is required to be managed by the people who are involved directly. It cannot be managed remotely by someone sitting very far away. Because for obvious reasons, as it is very clear now, that they would always have their vested interests deployed inside.
That's history, the law of history.
The law of history. So if that was so, it could have been seen, it should have been seen, it should be seen by us in managing our neighborhood issues actually. How we want to swing from one to the other side and so on and so forth. Because neighborhood is something. There is another issue which I would just like to mention over here. Amongst the leadership of Ukraine I saw from that point of time, there was Yulia Tymoshenko. That braid,
yes, of course.
That braid of hers actually.
Yeah, the braided lady who was put in jail by...
She was in jail when I reached there actually.
Yanukovych.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and if you read that history as to who was on which side and so on and so forth, there's plenty of interesting things over there. But she was in jail when I reached there. Actually, people are doing dharna pradarshan to try and get her out from there actually at that point of time. But the fact remains that from there...
Dharna, just for members of our global audience, means, you go and sit down and protest and don't and stop the streets, really, basically.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for that correction, actually. But I'm just saying that from there, what I saw the leaders, how they were panning out to be, when I come to Mr. Zelenskyy, I often wonder as to, could he have done something differently to not to ruin that beautiful country of Ukraine, which I call it my Avtaraya Rodina, my second homeland. Okay. I just want to remind your viewers actually that if you ever had any bit of sunflower oil, you have a little Ukraine in you. And I've got my tooth also sorted out over there in a root canal, so I have it in my zubi, in my teeth as well actually. So the point is that being that affectionate to that land and having seen the potential, imagine a country which is largely under snow for 4 to 6 months, yet is the largest grower of grain in Europe.
Yeah.
Right? So there is immense amount of potential.
Sunflower, wheat, so many
and I will come to the ingenuity a little later when the conflict has already bred, actually. Because right now we're talking about what could have happened. So I'm talking with Zelenskyy. Could he have done something differently? Did the other side, Americans mostly, realize that here is a person who is used, like what we're doing, of a mic and a camera? And if he has a narrative, he will read that and he will enact that. Was that the thing in the initial phase, where he kept enacting what he was being told to say so, and then took the entire conflict south? Now he was in a different mode. He changed his clothes and wore the fatigues and came to the front and trying to do what was required to be done. Was it too late by then? Question. Has to be seen. So how neighborhood is to be managed, and how the national interests, which are always a sacrosanct thing, not the friends and foes, that needs to be seen actually very clearly. This is my gathering of lessons from the Ringside view.
Okay, so 2014, you're there, and the conflict really erupts because Russia simply cannot give away Crimea. After all, Potemkin, the great lover of Catherine the Great, conquered it for her, and that was Russian access to warm water. There was no way the Russians were ever going to give Crimea away to Ukraine, and in 1954 it was none other than Nikita Khrushchev who gifted it to Ukraine. So in Russian minds it was theirs. And then, of course, the conflict erupts in Donbass and Luhansk. Walk us through that period, the little grain men you've already mentioned. Walk us through that period. So what did you see?
Yeah, thank you very much. So trust me that in Crimea, right up to the Yalta coast where I traveled, I thought it was the most amazing place, in that Russian and Ukrainian existence was practically intermeshed. Practically intermeshed. A couple of times on the Victory Day, I was there at Crimea to see that wonderful parade, Black Sea Fleet, and so on and so forth, and whatnot, actually. And Yalta, of course, you know what happened in the Second World War. That is a place. Yalta Palace, Yalta Conference is still a very important landmark, as you know, for that.
The contours of the post-war world.
Yeah. So how did I come into this entire thing, and how I did get the ringside view of this conflict brewing, apart from what was happening in Kyiv? Kyiv, of course, we knew. You remember those shooters, those snipers on the Maidan, and the people who came and occupied over there in thick of winters and so on and so forth. Somewhere I have a picture in which I am standing on Maidan with everything burnt out. I was yelled upon, get back into the embassy, because I was out there in Maidan trying to see what exactly is happening, because of my own curiosity, and when the snipers were taking shots and everything was happening over there. So that was in Kyiv. But I got involved because they were our students who were studying in different cities. So the first place we got an SOS call was from Crimea. Our ambassador got a call from the parents, our children are in Crimea, and Crimea is in Ukraine, or in Russia, what's going to happen? So the ambassador came and said, boys, we have this issue at hand. So I said, let me go. I'll go and be with them. I'll comfort them, and I'll take care of it, whatever is required, and then I'll come back to you. He was a little apprehensive, of course, because, you'd have to change sides, and there was issue of passport and blah, blah, blah. I said, don't worry, sir, because I've been working the streets, so I will be able to go through, don't worry. So I was given the go-ahead. I went across and I stayed in Crimea at the same hotel where the crew from BBC and other world services was staying, mind you. And they were standing in the same hotel carrying out such coverage of the entire thing while the city was rather peaceful. Zelenskyy Ploshad, Zelenskyy Square was where the main protest was happening. That is where the hands had changed way, actually, for the matter. And everybody went to dinner in the restaurants post that later at night, actually. So I asked those crew, why are you raising this red flag? Yeah. But then there are dynamics to it, actually. Coming back to the point. The point is that when I was there and I spoke to the students, this was city of Simferopol. Simferopol is the capital of Crimea. So when I spoke to the students over there, I took them all into account and briefed them, so on and so forth. Now, this is how we will do, this is what we will do. But luckily, we did not have to evacuate from there. The transition was rather peaceful. I went and saw their parliament building, as they call it, actually, and there were these malenki, little green men standing there with Balkalava put, and that's about all, actually, for that. Because there the narrative has been set, and that wonderfully intertwined Russian-Ukrainian presence had changed hands. Ukrainian soldiers, officers have joined Russian armed forces. Then all that happened and just changed. That was the first change of nationality of a sizable portion of land after Second World War in that area. And that would happen without firing a single bullet. So obviously I can understand the West was feeling pretty let down that they let this happen. They didn't have the ear to the ground. Whatever was a failure on their part, and a lot happened. But in that, I understood that now the Russian mechanism, their so-called hybrid warfare, which we can speak about in a different way altogether, was already deployed. It was happening. Crimea, of course, has a problem of water, fresh water, and the access to mainland, which now they have secured through this conflict, as you're aware, that all that has been secured. So it was very clear to us that now
they have a land bridge now to Crimea.
In fact, talking about bridge, we had a small problem at hand. While in Ukraine, I was handling the project of AN-32 modernization. It was a very big project of 104 aeroplanes, 105, but one got crashed, so one crashed, so 104 were left actually. So the plot was five aeroplanes would come, get overhauled in this plant, which is contiguous to Zhytomyr Airport, the smaller airport in Kyiv, and then they fly out to India and like this. So the last batch was at my hand. I mean, sorry, not the last batch. We had to do 35 aeroplanes. This second last batch was at my hand, and I was about to come back when this war happened. And the air route to Ankara, the first halt by the was over Crimea. And now we could not go over Crimea. So I had no choice but to take the aeroplanes all the way west to Bucharest. And then from Bucharest head to Istanbul, because you could not make it to Ankara. The whole planning had to be changed and so on. So be that it may, the fact remained that I realized that Crimea is gone for good. And that gave us an indication as to what's going to happen in the East. Because that mechanics of hybrid warfare had started to deploy over there, and it was very clear that if they don't get their acts together, then that will happen. This is where the West woke up in significant manners, and they deployed good amount of boots on ground under different guard. That guard was simple, that it was what do we call as standard and recommended practices exercise between two forces. The radio phraseology to be commonalized so that they can be used as some peacekeeper somewhere and so on and so forth. How do you use radio? How do we use basic tactics that can be synchronized? So under that garb, the trainers who were there from the West and NATO especially, they became the custodians of now keeping their watch. And that had started. This is where the conflict started to happen, which basically brewed in the eastern part. Kharkiv, Donetsk, Prototowsk, Zaporozhye, even down till Kherson later. This is the arch which I've left actually. So that's where I thought it's very important to understand. Just 30 seconds more, because this again happened in Lugansk. City of Lugansk had a big medical college. By the way, I hope you're aware that the cost of East European MBBS is sizably less than what is available here in India.
Yeah, that's what I've been told.
That is the reason why many of our students go over there, which I suppose is a good thing. Of course, they have to come back and take an MCI exam before they can start practicing over here. But I found very bright young people over there from all parts of the country who were there. So I was sent to Lugansk again under a similar situation where this thing was happening. And now it was live and real because the gunshots were being fired outside and everything was happening. I had to hire a train and move this about 800-900 students in the train over buses. Put them in the train. And the train came to Kyiv, where ambassador and all our setup was waiting for them to be received and done that. I had to go there because my connections, which I had with the plants over there, and I used the help from the people over there on the ground. And that is what I used to do, whatever I could do. We managed it, but it again allowed me, and that was Holi at that point of time. I spent Holi with those boys and girls over there and that place. When I put them in a hall and I addressed them, I had gone along with my assistant. I addressed them and I told them, I made groups, I made leaders. I said, when this happened, this is how the message will go. This is what you will do. This is what you will do. So I built that quasi operation and I moved them out in that place. This is where I again realized that now it is not coming back. The situation is such that it will not come back. It will not go to foster. It's going to get worse from here. It's only going to get more destructive from here. Both sides will suffer, whichever.
Yeah. The train had been set in motion.
Yes. So and it was an irreversible trend to my mind. and which unfortunately
proved to be true.
After you make your point, then I will come back to what happened in the second conflict, because I was there again for that.
Okay, so no, you mentioned hybrid warfare. Okay. What's the Russian model of hybrid warfare, and how did the West respond?
Atul, hybrid warfare would need another episode of
We'll have to get you back.
So let's keep that aside. But let me
give us an outline. Give us a teaser.
Let me make a good point, actually.
Yeah.
So the hybrid warfare, spoken about by many authors, and there's a lot of literature available over there. Is Russia's war actually a hybrid warfare? Is also some academics asking the question. But leave the mechanics aside. Look at the results. The result was, like I mentioned to you, that they managed to change nationality of a large piece of land, a crucial warm seaport where the Black Sea Fleet was based. They were able to change that nationality without firing a single bullet. Do I see anything more? No way. So this is what was the trajectory of the warfare which was turning out to. Of course, West jumped in, and the contest heated up, so to speak. People lost lives, and so much of destruction took place subsequently. But that was the potential. That is the potential of hybrid war. So it's a very important issue for our own armed forces and it includes everything, lawfare, I don't know what all, because the entire set of academia, the entire set of institutions of army, judiciary, administration, diplomacy, foreign services, economy, everything comes into it. So that is an amalgamation which is an ultimate binder of the national policy.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the second phase of the conflict, 2022, 24 February 2022. All right? Russian troops move in. And you were there again.
Yeah.
So, what transpires then for the Russian tanks to start rolling in?
Okay. Right. So, I was back in 2014, I came back to my job normally here. Whatever happened, wonderful time in the Air Force. January 2020, early January 2020, I left the Air Force. And I was trying to become a civil helicopter pilot, which I am right now. I was flying till very recently for a company in Mumbai, taking passengers from the ONGC dispersal to their ships and rigs and getting them back. But in that, my interest in trying to understand during this conflict, and this is a very, very important key point actually. The way I saw through the conflict, I am completely mesmerized by the Ukrainian ingenuity.
I see.
Okay, that's not only on the battlefield. People will tell you how males exited Ukraine. How their own population deserted. They don't have people on ground. They don't have boots on ground. Some people have come from outside. So on and so forth. Whatever actually.
Yeah.
But in that also, how Ukrainians, common Ukrainians, leave politicians aside, common Ukrainians held on to their nationality, held on to their spirit, held on to their ingenuity on the battlefield, off the battlefield, in the domain of military tech. For those of your viewers who are perhaps not very much aware, Ukrainian military tech is huge. I'm talking original when I landed over there. It may surprise you that 40% of Indian Navy's frontline ships are powered by Zorya's engine, which is made in Ukraine. It's absolutely important for us that we have them with us. And mind you, unlike the aeroplanes, the ships are different. You have to first choose the engine, because engine transmission has to be quite good. And then you build the ship around it so that the sonar can't catch it. So you have to identify the engine provider first before you arrive at your ship. That is the kind of a planning process. So Zorya powers more than 40% of Indian Navy's. Very important for us. Antonov, anything to do with Antonov, AN-12 and AN-20, AN-12 and AN-32, what we flew in our Air Force. And AN-124 is what UN survives on. And
which most people don't know.
So Antonov is thoroughbred inside to out, including engines and everything else, Ukrainian. It's got not an hour of Russian in it. So Ukraine MICR, or military industrial complex, was itself huge at that point in time. Alright? But in the war, how it transformed itself is a story that someday the world should document.
I'm sure people are documenting
I'm sure
it already.
But you look at it from my perspective as to how this tech. Give an example. In Kharkiv, I found out that some small company was making a very peculiar ammunition, which could be mounted on the pylon of an aeroplane, of a low-flying aeroplane. It just dispenses very small transmitters over a swath of ground, GPS jammers. They would all transmit, they would noise jam the GPS, and they will die down as the battery dies down. So in a period of time, when you want to operate over there, you can deny GPS in a sort. Selective non-availability of GPS you could achieve at that point of time. Their expertise in radio listening and eavesdropping is very well known. There was an incident which happened in an unknown army, and there was a unit which had some equipment from there. I'm sure your listeners know about it actually. So it was being brought from there. So you could do that. There were many things. They made passive radars. That means it's just a receiver, not transmitting anything else. Poland has a solution, but this equipment of Ukraine was such that using the normal transmission from the radio nav aids of the aeroplane, they're able to mimic and understand. Without opening up any transmitter, they can come to know that you're coming. Imagine, wonderful technology. Of course, needs to be matured, needs to be tied up, needs to be dovetailed into the systems. That is where our ingenuity could have come actually for that. Zubr, Bison, perhaps the largest hovercraft, skims over any rocky stretch and the sea, carries tanks, has an amazing technology in which it can sidestep and turn around in a very small place, which is also there on the Zoria engines. Crazy, absolutely. So they were at that level already. From there, those boys and girls, men and women, what unmanned aerial system has done to this war, very soon people will be coming out. And I know for sure that people who built it then during the conflict, tested it during the conflict, and used it to destroy very expensive equipment.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, a large country like Russia would not have
the tanks, for instance.
Tank, for instance, actually. So specifics will take time. So I'm just trying to tell you indicators as to where you should research and try and translate.
I mean, look. We should get into specifics because a lot of our viewers wouldn't have the time. Yeah. Some would. Some would spend hours researching, but others wouldn't.
So, like I said, these very inexpensive unmanned aerial systems, which affected very large equipment on ground. How they intercepted, they went into Kursk. Of course, there is a lot of Western help was available, but still, when they realized that the fighter aeroplanes are not coming through, so 27 is deploying, they applied their ingenuity to keep the conflict on, to keep the pressure on. Now I come back to the February of 2022. All right, that is when the tanks rolled across from Kharkiv and from the east and came to this place. So my friends were calling me for something or the other. Actually, I would go down there. I said, okay, I'll come, but are you sure? Mr. Putin is all lined up that side. He's not going to come down. No, don't worry, it's okay. Just a balance to come. I landed up in Kyiv. I took a car and I was driving to Zaporozhye.
And you were not yet a civilian helicopter pilot then?
No, I was.
You were already?
I was. So in our mechanism, we had breaks actually. Correct. When you fly for 6 weeks and you have a 3-week off.
Okay.
So I had
you back. So you left the military?
I left the military immediately in 15 days. I had started to fly.
Perfect. Got it.
Because I had the qualifications of that. Of course, COVID also hit at that point of time, but that's another story. Point here is that when I reached Zaporozhye, I had a good time with my friends, chatted and met old contacts and everybody else. And I was looking for the local beer with Natsit. 15, 17 is a very old Ukrainian beer actually. So we went to the bar and had that, came back, slept off, only to be woken up by the phone ringing consistently because Mr. Putin had rolled across. Now, this is the time to speak about the operation which Russia launched to quickly end this conflict in their own terms. And the fight back with the help of the people who were deployed on ground from the West and Ukrainian military. I'm talking about a very audacious, very, very audacious attempt by helicopters of Russian armed forces to carry out what in typical terms in the Air Force we call as SHBO, Special Heliborne Operations. Taking troops in the helicopters all the way from their secured bases. Where? to a small airport outside Kyiv,
Yeah.
home to Antonov. Right? So when I was there in Zaporizhzhia, I got stuck badly and I take the car and I start driving back towards Kyiv. These helicopters are flying over. The Su-25, Su-27 are flying over. And there was chaos and there was roadblocks and so on and so forth. But I was somehow managing and coming, because the idea was to come close to Kyiv, because we had to, all the flights were cancelled. I did not have a flight to come back home. I had to have a plan in my mind to get back. Because remember, I had to come back to my own job. And I did not have any visa for any other place.
So you couldn't have popped into Poland.
Minor issues, actually.
Minor issues.
So the
You could have swum through the Black Sea, swum through the Suez Canal.
Also for us was calling. But anyway, be that it may.
You're a fit man.
So the point I was trying to make was that when this was happening, I realized that this is something, it's a very important moment in helicopter pilot's life. Okay, unfortunately, I could not be part of that formation or that fight. But I was there to witness it from close quarters and to follow up later with the help of my other friends who were there to follow with their help actually as to what exactly happened. So the long and short is that this train of helicopters, the Mi-8s, for them everything is Mi-8s.
Yeah.
Mi-17 is an export version which we call it Na parallel. So for them everything is Mi-8. So Mi-8s are carrying these troops. Mi-35s, my own helicopter which I live and die by.
You like it, clearly.
I mean, there is no match to it actually. That's another story. So Mi-35,
we cover it in another.
So Mi-35 was escorting them. The Kamos were escorting them. Ka-50s actually, they were escorting them. Great machine for that matter. So they were escorting them. And there was this battle. There were many videos, missiles flying across, flares flying across, hits taking place, and so on and so forth. And animations available as to how they turned over here, there, and then took a hit and took a hit there. It was all crazy. So they reached this airport outside, and initial gains were being made because that night I was in Kyiv and I was staying on a high rise where everybody else was inside the bunkers. I was left in that flat alone high rise, and I could hear the noises and everything that was happening. So it is then when the system kicked on. And the reaction to make sure that the runway is not made available for a follow-on fixed-wing transport aircraft to land over there.
With more men.
Fleet of ILs or Antonovs or whatever the Russians had. Because this normally happens. It's called the link-up. So initially the SHBF force goes, secures the airport. Now the link-up happened on the fixed-wing aeroplane.
Yeah.
So they made sure that this doesn't happen. And although they had taken ground on that airport, the Ukrainians, with the help of they started to maneuver.
With the help of other foreign troops.
Yes, because there were instructors over there.
Correct.
And it is my understanding.
Yeah.
It's my understanding, which is I'm very clear about it, that they quickly saw this entire plan, and then they said this is a counter. And because
the reports are that it was mainly Americans and British instructors.
Mainly.
That's what I
hear. But there are other nations.
There must have been others.
Because
because of NATO.
Yeah, the NATO and the West always has a very good mix of things.
Interoperability, as they say.
No, so the point I was trying to make was that this is where this fight started to turn dirty, and the link-up could not happen, and that became bloody mess. That was another very important turning point from the point of Russia. Russia had lost the initial momentum, because obviously, remember, attacker always has the initiative.
Yes,
he chooses where to come in from.
The time,
defender has to now
adjust,
jockey and adjust itself actually. So Russia had the initiative. It had the first, and they came in actually. They tried something out, which was very audacious. Over that distance, over that range. Of course, we are at Sagat Chowk. Sagat Chowk reminds us of 71.
Yes,
and
Sagat Singh.
East. But those distances were much smaller. When it happened from one of.
Just very quickly, Sagat Singh, we've had an episode on him. He was the great hero of the 1971 war. We've had his son interview with us, actually. So General Sagat Singh Rathore is a legend of the Indian military, and of course used helicopters and yada yada. You can read about him, learn more about him, but that was a much smaller distance.
So that was a much smaller, much manageable distance, much less air defense density against these, and it was all dark and night, and it was small hops against Meghna rivers and tributaries and so on and so forth. Here, this was a large distance given out that you have entered now and you could be tracked. See, the peculiar thing about the helicopters, which we are all very aware of actually, is that once you spot a helicopter visually or by radar or by in the beam, you can put a pin on that location. And now, what is our speed? 240 kilometers an hour at the mass, right? 4 kilometers to a minute. So you can start expanding it. So in that time, we cannot exit, we cannot just go away. We have to be there only. So if a faster moving platform comes in, he will find us in that area, using on the other. So I'm just saying, that is the kind of vulnerability.
You're sitting ducks, basically, once that happens.
Well, I will not accept it because for my own reasons, actually, we ain't sitting ducks. But be that it may, it brings
You're flying ducks.
Well, it brings new challenges. Let's say. So we had this interesting contest, and which is what I saw, and that's what happened. So that was
massive casualties. Massive.
So that was one turning point. I'd be very specific. What that was one turning point where Russia lost its initial leadership, and then onwards, the entire conflict turned into a different manner. It became a war of attrition. There was not much of a movement taking place. And there were several issues. What kind of soldiers are coming in? What's happening? Given the ingenuity of the Ukrainian people, soldiers and people on ground, the tech support on ground, what they started to do then, that's another success story.
The use of drones, the use of missiles.
If I'm not wrong, the last attack from Russia on the White Front attack has come about 3 days prior. That has happened now. You see what happened in Kursk. They went inside that deep and held it for that long. Unless that audacious Russian operation happened, and now they've been obstructed from there.
They came through a pipeline.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that they came through a pipeline. Russian special forces, please note, gentlemen, that they came through a pipeline.
Ladies and gentlemen,
they came through a pipeline, and they were casualties, but they emerged the other side. So I'm just saying,
extraordinary operation.
This tussle happened, and
so both sides, the troops have proven to be pretty innovative. I mean, the Russians have come up with glide bombs. The Russians have come up with innovations themselves.
Yeah, that is there because in the first war I saw as to how the helicopters were shot by machine guns, planes were destroyed. How all that was done. Because I remember in the first time when I was there, 2014, and we were trying to work out as to can we have a runway secure enough to land a aeroplane from India and pull the boys and girls out from there. So I was scouting for that, and I reached this airport, and I hitched right with the milkman to try and see what the runway is. But that was the place where the night before an IL-76 was shot. An IL-76 was landing on the runway, and it was shot by a shoulder-fired missile on the idling engine while it was landing, and the entire aeroplane was strewn up on the runway.
Wow.
So it was very obvious and clear to me that no matter what you do, in this part, of course, it was too close to the conflict that it can happen. Mind you, by then, the other issue had also happened. You lost a civil aeroplane.
Yes. Indeed.
Tail color red and blue. Being mixed up with IL-96 in which Mr. Putin is coming back. And Mr. Modi was coming back as well behind him. We had to intervene and get his route altered away from the conflict. So all that was also happening. So the times are very specific. So that is when it was decided that it is best to go on ground and try and pull them out by the train. We fixed up in Kyiv, we went there, we managed that, 7-8 coaches, and pulled everybody out, and that was our.
So what now? You've laid out a wonderful ringside view, and now, of course, we have a new president in the White House, and we have talks. We have talk of a truce. In fact, some sort of a truce, apparently, it seems that. Now Zelenskyy will have to read from a new script.
So Atul, that's one interesting way to put across actually. But let me just say this. Let me look at the idealistic view as to how this can resolve actually. Okay. Then we can say the best possible actually. And then we can see how it can.
The scenarios.
So like I said, neighborhood requires restoration. And a very important point which comes in, which links me up to this famous mythology of India of Mahabharata, Kaurava and Pandava. When this issue was being discussed about EU being signed for Ukraine,
Ukraine is a part of EU.
EU. This
Joining
is 2000.
the EU.
Yes, yes. So you're aware that even Russia has as a federation. They also have
of course,
something like an EU of their own, actually, named escaped me. I'm sorry. They also have. So the customs union is called the customs union. So Russia offered that, okay, you want to be with the EU, no problems. Go with them, no issues. But do not exclude customs union. Keep us included. Because they wanted to have that tie which was carrying on. They said, okay, it doesn't matter. They have adjusted that much. So it reminds me of that Kaurav and Pandav. We said, 5 villages. You give us just 5 villages. 5 Pandavas, 5 villages. Not even of the, what should I tell your viewers actually?
The tip of the needle.
So this is where they said.
I mean, so you seem to be holding Victoria Nuland and the Hawks in Washington DC responsible for this. The neoconservatives, in a way.
Look, Atul, history is fraught with examples where people who were not in that area and they were sitting somewhere else in a much powerful
That's
position.
The history of the last 500 years.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, we are sitting in front of a map of the world. And so you look at the map of the world, Latin America, Portuguese and Spanish, all the way till Mexico.
So that
you
is
look
why
at India, the British and the French East India companies had a bish bash bosh.
So that is why I'm talking about the idealistic solution. Why?
Yeah.
Because I am not counting out that such Newlands and Piats are still sitting in that setup. Okay? So they were going to, there is a rare earth element in Ukraine which are to be taken out. So there are people who are trying to anchor and everything else to do what is required to be done. So I will leave that out right now because that's a dynamics which is a different issue altogether. But I'm saying ideally the earnestness of maintaining a neighborhood needs to be considered.
So what you're saying is Russia and Ukraine have to learn to live together.
There is no choice.
Got it.
There is no choice. Now, the flavor changes from east and what this bitterness will do over the years and how it can be managed is a different ballgame altogether. Mind you, the people in the west of Ukraine and very dear friends of mine, very interesting, I was traveling with my friend, his son, a basketballer of 16, 17 years of age. I spoke to him in Russian and he refused to speak to me. For the whole trip, he said, no, you're talking Russian.
I'll only speak in Ukrainian. Yeah. So that divided counts.
It's a different language.
Yeah.
So all those divisions have come in already.
And the division is even there in the church.
Church. Many things have happened. Church has changed. The oldest Orthodox monastery was in Ukraine. That was the Vatican of Orthodox Christianity in the east of Europe. Pechas Lavra. Lavra is the cave. It is the cave monastery by the side of Dnieper actually. Now, I had taken our former head chief there actually when he had come there on the visit. He was a Catholic himself, but he was kind enough to go there and accept their honor. So that changed. The old calendar went out. Stare Novoy God. Old new year has gone out. So many things have changed forever. So I'm saying those scars would remain. So how they manage this neighborhood? But I have a firm belief that only people who are there involved, they should have the biggest say. And if they have it right, then probably they can work out a constructive or a positive.
So that's the idealistic view.
Okay.
So
this idealistic view.
What happens now after
this
all this
idealistic view, Atul simply said, is not going to happen.
Yeah.
We do not have one Madam Merkel, Angela Merkel, one European leader who was able to speak to both sides.
Yeah, Angela Merkel could, yeah.
For her East European credentials.
She was from East Germany. She spoke Russian.
So, this conflict went down the drain because she was not there in the office, to my belief. Perhaps.
Okay.
If there was somebody who could speak on both sides and can do that actually. I thought our Prime Minister went on the train all the way. He also had great latitude to do that actually. But
we don't have the heft yet.
Yeah, so be that it may. I mean, people have to try whichever way. You look at it right now. So my belief is this idealistic solution is not going to be fructifying. It is going to get meddled and dirtied by many such power factions.
Okay,
now, what's happening? Sorry, just last point. What's happening across the Atlantic? The government changing and everything else happening. They have their own issues. The people who were before them, they had their own issues. So they would drive it this way. But this idealistic should not happen.
Got it.
Poland is emerging as a very strong pole in this entire game.
Of course.
Okay.
They've already said they'll go nuclear.
Yes. So please understand. So this idealistic situation is not going to happen. Now, how badly it gets muddled, how much time it takes, and what all is taken out of there actually, and what is taken out of Ukraine is my last point, which you will have to give me 2 minutes.
Yes, sure. Take all the time you want. Actually, go ahead. Take the 2 minutes now.
Okay. So So let's put this conflict aside, and I just want to tell you that what I look at from our country's interest.
From India's interests.
From India. And I am a military man. I was a military man. In my head and mind, I am still one. So I would talk about that.
I would have loved to see you as Air Chief Marshal.
Please expunge this remark. Just say Air Chief Marshal. Retired Air Commodore. I never had that caliber. I could not have been there actually. But let me still make a point here. So now we are not talking about Russia, Ukraine. I am talking about national interest. When the regions in which you have some penetration are at conflict, okay, and those regions have a technical or a economical or a geographical or a mineral-wise edge over you, world over, history over, that is a time for the national interest to be kicked in and try and get things to cut that delta and get your own system up. Right? You should not have had an issue to ask Indians from somewhere else to build your own ships. Right? By now we should have become quite Atmanirbhar, so to speak, self-reliant for your audience actually. Right? So this is where I thought our eastern neighbor played a very good card.
China.
In my first tenure over there, I mean my only tenure over there, 11 to 14, what I kept seeing is that they were at it. Singularly, very focused, very sharp, very quick, and they were able to extricate things and take it out.
Technologies, expertise, systems.
So the story of landing is the most interesting in fact. And your viewers might have read it actually. I'll just narrate very shortly.
No, please go right ahead. Not all of them have. So it's an education for a lot of them.
So what happens is that when you hear the story, it will tell you, what was the level they were operating at actually. Well, surprise to some of you that our Vikramaditya and their lining are actually brothers. They both were born in a city called Mykolaiv, which
just tell them what do both these vessels do.
Okay. Vikramaditya is our.
They are not every viewer is defense.
I'm sorry, my apologies. So Vikramaditya is our aircraft carrier. Lining is the Chinese aircraft carrier, which is roaring in the South China Sea, and it has led the development of their subsequent aircraft carriers and so on and so forth. Vikramaditya has come to us from Russia. It has come from the city of St. Petersburg, where it was a Russian aircraft carrier earlier. It has been now refitted to take our aircraft on board, MiG-29s, and that's what is now flying in our service. So I'm saying Vikramaditya and Liaoning are both brothers. They were same model displacement design of aircraft carriers, born on a dockyard which is in the city of Mykolaiv. Ukrainians will call it Mykolaiv, Russians will say Nikolai. Right? So in the city of Mykolaiv they were born. Vikramaditya went to Russia and was in St. Petersburg, where we contracted it from, and finally our team went there and refitted for a whole long period. Different story. Story of Lining is that Lining was lying just like a shell. The news came that there is a company in Macau which wants to buy this Lining and make a floating casino out of it in Macau.
So Liaoning is, by the way, Liaoning is the northern state right next to North Korea.
Absolutely.
So they claimed it was going to Macau.
The claim was that it will go to Macau as a floating casino. Immediately West, everybody ears went up. It's not happening. There's something deep to it actually. Now, Liaoning was bought by this company. It was being dragged through Bosphorus Strait, and the green the environmentalists put up a big fight and said, no, you can't take it to Bosphorus Strait. They tried to stall, delay what was required. But of course, deep pockets, focus, everything else, it went through. Now, God's intervened. In the Sea of Greece, there was a massive storm, and this hull got decoupled from the tug. They almost lost it.
Wow.
But then the storms went high, and again it was caught on. And by the time combination was turning around the Cape and heading towards our part of the world, that company in Macau merged with Liaoning as you say exactly correctly.
Yeah,
My pronunciation is wrong. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That landed up
I've traveled a bit around China. That's the only reason.
So please help me with that. Actually, that's
And a Chinese girlfriend too. That also helps.
So that company got merged with that shipyard over there, Dalan also, and in this period there were hordes of experts from the city of Mykolaiv which were relocated over there. And now when this hull reached over there, the work started. By the time we were refitting and trying to get our ship back, and after huge overruns of time and cost and whatnot, actually planning was outpouring the sea in the trials in South China Sea, and rest is known to your viewers. Focused. Not only that, not on the military part, but on the food security part. Right? China. It would be surprising that they leased an area of land almost as much as Belgium in size. Built a deep sea port right next to it. Now, obviously, the south doesn't have snow, so it can grow the year long. So, year long, they would grow grains over there and ship it. Call it food security. When you are having a region under pressure, under conflict, and they're looking for help and what they have not, the people who are involved in diplomacy, they are looking after their own national interest.
Of course.
And that is what
geopolitics is a blood sport.
So that is what I was understanding that this should have happened. There were many such places and some such cases where we could have really scored well because we have a very good emotional connect.
Yeah. I mean, they watch Raj Kapoor.
No, sir. Raj Kapoor is history. Only Babushka will respond to you on Raj Kapoor. By the way, do you know who is the most famous actor in that part of the world? You'd be surprised. Mithun Chakravarti.
Oh, okay. Yes, I would have come.
If the song plays Jimmy Jimmy Aja Aja, there is not a single Ukrainian woman or girl who will not dance in that hall. Okay, that is a fact. I have witnessed the funeral of a young girl who went to her grave wearing a sari and holding a Mithun Chakravarti portrait in her hand. Okay. And we had to get a letter from him. Ambassador to speak to him. I told him, no, sir, you must speak to him and, he has to write back. And he wrote back. The letter was given to the father as a closure on that. So that is the kind of emotional connect. Family is one important cultural connect between us. Religion is another important.
Religion in what way?
The allegiance to our religion. Here also we are, whichever way we tell, we are spiritual people deep inside. And there also, whatever happens, you would find them bound from the church and, they would be God-fearing before the food and everything else. You will see that. Actually. So there is
religiosity.
Absolutely. So there is, there are these two strong currents. And third is friendship, which I am a living example for. So that's how I realized that we are so much in common and we could have, leveraged much more. But I think we must have done it. I'm sure people who are responsible, they're doing it right now.
One can live in hope. I can tell you they are not doing so in Washington, D.C., where I live. Anyway, Ashutosh, lovely to have you. We'll continue this discussion. We'll have you for other episodes. And we have a lot to discuss.
Yeah. All I want to just say from my side a big thank you to you and to your viewers. I hope I've been able to just do justice on the ringside view. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.